In a morning that was still young, when thin fog hung above the old rice fields, a boy walked along a dirt path, still wet with dew. Briefly, before we continue, tell me where you are listening to this story, in what state, and with what feeling. Write in the comments column, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel so I know you like the stories I give. Let's continue into the story this time. He was not a nobleman's son, not an official's son, nor the son of a great knight. He was just a child from a simple family, living from the paddy fields and their own strength. But that morning, he walked with something that felt like a small hope inside his chest. A hope he didn't yet understand, but he knew his path that day would lead him to a place he had never imagined. That child's name would be known to the world centuries later. But this morning, he was just little Gajah Mada, a boy looking at the world with eyes full of soft light. In the distance, the Majapahit kingdom began to wake slowly. Sounds of roosters, sounds of traders, sounds of cart wheels, pulled gently by horses, all formed a rhythm that was slow and harmonious, like a gamelan melody, played from behind the fog. Little Gajah Mada stood by the roadside, observing the great fortress of Majapahit. He did not know that one day he would walk inside that palace with the steps of great leaders. He only knew that his heart felt pulled there, a place where soldiers walked firmly, where officials walked with respect, and where the kingdom pulsed like a heart, giving life to thousands of souls. When he approached the soldier training gate, the sound of clashing wood was heard softly, mixed with the sound of the breathing of guards who were training under the morning sunlight. Gajah Mada stopped. He closed his eyes for a moment, regulating his breath slowly, and opened his eyes with a calmer light. One day, I want to be inside there, he mumbled quietly, almost like a prayer. An old guard saw him standing there. He was not angry, did not chase him away, only approached and looked at the boy with a small smile that was not too wide, but warm. "What do you want here, son?" asked the guard gently. Gajah Mada swallowed, then answered, with a voice almost whispering, "I want to learn." The guard laughed a little, not mocking, but like someone who recognized a small fire that once lived inside himself long ago. "Learn what?" "Learn to be useful," said Gajah Mada, his voice soft but steady. "Learn to protect what must be protected." The guard stared for a long time, as if trying to read the future from the boy's eyes. Then he opened the small wooden gate that was usually tightly closed, and said quietly, "Come in." Majapahit always accepts people who come with a calm heart and with slow steps, full of respect, full of silence. Little Gajah Mada stepped into the training court, the first place of his long journey. That day, without him realizing it, was the day the world began to change its course. The day when a child entered a gate that would later lead him to become a figure who carved an oath that echoed through Nisantra. But for now, for this still gentle morning, he was just a little boy, trying to understand his own breath, in the middle of a world that was far bigger than himself. And in that silence, Majapahit whispered softly, "Welcome, Gajah Mada." On his first day of training, Gajah Mada stood on the soft earthen court, still wet with morning dew. In front of him, young soldiers lined up in silence. No shouting, no loud voices. Majapahit morning training did not begin with strength, but with silence. An old trainer walked slowly in front of the line. His steps were calm. The sound of his cloth almost inaudible. He stopped in front of the beginners and looked at them one by one, with eyes that were gentle but deep. In Majapahit, he said quietly, "Before you learn to swing a weapon, you must learn to hear your own breath." The students nodded without sound. Gajah Mada tried to imitate them, though his small body trembled slightly with a mix of awe and nervousness. The old trainer raised his hand slowly. Inhale. Silence descended upon the court. Only the sound of wind moving between coconut leaves. Hold. Time felt slow, like the world was holding its breath too. Exhale. The sound of dozens of students breathing came out together, forming a long rhythm, almost like the song of the earth. The training took place, not with violence, but with rhythm, with patience, with deep silence. The students were taught to stand tall, under the sunlight, without moving even a little, for a long time. "If your body is not stable," said the trainer, "then your heart is not stable." Little Gajah Mada tried as hard as he could not to sway. His legs sometimes trembled, but he kept standing. He looked at the ground, saw his own footprints, and felt the earth sending a slow warmth through the soles of his feet. The trainer approached him. "You just arrived," he said, "but your breath is already calm." Gajah Mada looked down shyly. "I am only trying to listen, master." The trainer placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, his touch gentle, like dew in the morning. "That is the first lesson," he said. "Listening before acting." Days passed, with basic exercises. Asterisk walking slowly without sound. Asterisk holding breath. Asterisk observing wind movement. Asterisk feeling the ground underfoot. Asterisk standing tall in long silence. Other students sometimes complained in their hearts, but Gajah Mada accepted everything with a diligence unusual for a child his age. Every time the wind passed, he tried to hear its message. Every time a leaf fell, he watched how it fell. Every time the sun moved, he learned to recognize his shadow. He learned that being a soldier was not just about strength, but about presence, about awareness, about silence. One afternoon, when the sky turned soft orange, the old trainer called Gajah Mada. They sat together, under an old banyan tree, whose roots spread like paths of time on the ground. "Gajah Mada," said the trainer quietly, "what made you come here?" The boy was silent for a long time. He looked at the ground, touched the grass, and took a breath, as if wanting to find the answer inside himself. "I want to be useful," he answered finally. "For whom?" "For all that lives on this land." The trainer stared at him with deep eyes. "An answer that comes from the heart," he said. Then he continued, with a softer voice, "But remember, one that wants to protect the world must learn to protect himself first." The afternoon wind moved the banyan leaves, making a soft rustling sound, as if agreeing with those words. That night, Gajah Mada slept in the small barracks with other students. But even though his eyes were closed, his heart felt full of light. In his dream, he saw Majapahit, like a vast ocean, with white sails, moving slowly. In the middle of that ocean, he stood alone, on a small boat. But he was not afraid. He only heard a gentle message, repeated by the wind. "Be calm. Listen to the world, and it will guide you." When he woke up, morning had not yet arrived. But he felt that something within him had begun to grow. Something that later would carry him to a place he had never imagined. But that journey had only just begun. Days of training passed, with long silence. And every morning, when the sun had not fully risen, Gajah Mada began to hear something that other students did not hear. He began to hear the voice of the kingdom. Not a loud voice, not a gong, not a trumpet, but a gentle voice, born from the pulse of the Majapahit world itself. The sound of people walking slowly, the sound of distant gamelan, the sound of wind passing through wooden towers, and the sound of whispers coming from rooms he had never entered. One morning, after a long silent practice, the old trainer called him. "Mada," he said gently, "come with me." Without many words, the trainer walked slowly across the training court, then towards a small gate that was rarely opened. Gajah Mada followed with calm steps, though in his heart something trembled, like a thin leaf touched by dew. They entered the inner area of Majapahit. Here was where he first saw the kingdom from a closer distance. Large buildings with dark red roofs, tall wooden pillars finely carved, spacious courtyards planted with white frangipani, guard soldiers with silent eyes, servants walking without sound. For Gajah Mada, all of it felt like another world. A world calling him, but also a world teaching him to stay humble. The old trainer said, without turning, "You must learn That a kingdom is not just a fortress. Not just weapons. Not just war. He stopped in front of a long wooden hall. That was not heavily guarded. A kingdom is subtle voices. Keeping balance. He looked at Gajah Mada. Listen. Gajah Mada closed his eyes. He tried to regulate his breath. Becoming slow. Even slower. And suddenly, the world of Majapahit released its voice. Low voices. Of elders discussing. Sound of palm leaf manuscripts. Opened slowly. Sound of silk cloth. Rubbing gently. When officials passed. Sound of small birds. Perching on the hall roof. Sound of wind. Carrying the scent of sandalwood. From the inner palace rooms. And beneath all that. The deepest sound. A sound that felt like the heartbeat of the kingdom. The old trainer whispered. That is the voice of Majapahit. Gajah Mada heard it. With his whole body. Not just his ears. The voice was not loud. But it possessed a power that could not be explained. That voice made him feel like he was standing between the past and the future. Between his small self and the self that would one day be far greater. That day, the trainer took him to a deeper place. A small courtyard where senior soldiers practiced slow movements. Not to attack, but to align themselves with the rhythm of the earth. This is the core of Majapahit, said the trainer. Slow movement. Calm heart. Clear mind. He turned to Gajah Mada. One day, if you want to stand among leaders, you must learn silence. More than speech. Gajah Mada nodded slowly. Not just understanding, but feeling it in his chest. That afternoon, when the sun went down, and long shadows fell upon the royal courtyard, Gajah Mada sat alone, near a small pond. The pond was filled with white lotuses, slowly closing. As night began to fall, he heard the sound of water, sound of falling leaves, sound of the world slowing down. And he asked himself, is it possible I become part of this place? That question was not answered by anyone, but the night wind, blowing softly across the pond's surface, seemed to give a subtle signal. Maybe one day. Yes. When night came, the old trainer approached him. You know, he said quietly, many come to the training court because they want to be strong. He sat beside Gajah Mada. But very few come because they want to understand. He looked at that young face. And you are one who has the heart to understand. Gajah Mada didn't know what to say. He just looked down, listening to the sound of water breaking the silence. The trainer then said, Majapahit is not just a kingdom. It is a journey. And you have the steps suited for that journey. That night, when stars appeared above the palace roof, Gajah Mada raised his head and looked at the sky. He did not know that one day, his small steps would lead him to become the final fortress guarding Nusantara. He did not know that he would lead armies, face political storms, and utter an oath that shook the islands. He only knew that his heart became calmer after hearing the voice of the kingdom, a voice that later would guide him to a very great destiny. But for tonight, he was just a small student, sitting in the Majapahit courtyard that was silent, and the world slowly became dark in a gentle way. That morning, Majapahit did not sound like usual. No sound of training, no laughter of soldiers, no traders passing, carrying baskets of vegetables or pottery. What existed was only a long silence that felt heavy, like dark clouds hanging low. Gajah Mada, who now had grown into a young man, stood in the training courtyard, staring at senior soldiers who were preparing equipment. Someone with a gentle voice spoke to the students. A riot has occurred at the riverbank. Some soldiers will be sent. For those of you chosen, remember, you are not going to win, but to guard. Gajah Mada's name was called. His heart trembled. Not because of pride, not because of fear, but because he knew that his steps would enter another world. A world where silent training met reality. They walked in a small line, crossing the dirt path, soft from remaining rain. By the roadside, coconut trees swayed gently, as if escorting them toward something not yet understood. There were no loud voices in that line, only sound of breath, sound of clothes rubbing, and sound of slow steps treading wet ground. The old trainer walked in front, bearing a calm face. But Gajah Mada saw something in his eyes, an awareness that the world outside Majapahit was not always as gentle as the training court. They arrived at the bank of a small river, which was usually very peaceful. But that morning, the river water was turbid, some trees broken, and the ground around looked like it was recently traversed by panicked people. A group of rioters, few in number, were standing across, holding simple weapons, shaking in their hands. Not evil men, not great rebels, just a small group, lost in chaos and anger. The old trainer said quietly, without raising his voice, "Do not attack. Hold position. Let them see that we come without intent to harm." Gajah Mada felt his chest tighten. This was the first time he saw real tension, real fear, real anger. He tried to regulate his breath, like during training. Slow, deep, silent. But his body was not as calm as usual. One of the rioters shouted from across the river. A shout not long, but filled with fear. He stepped forward, pointing a spear. And that was the moment When Gajah Mada's world moved faster than his thoughts, he stepped forward, not to attack, but to protect. Two young soldiers beside him, who began to panic. The old trainer whispered, "Mada, stay calm." But in his heart, there was a big wave, rising like a tide. He saw that rioter, running across the shallow river, water splashing, spear raised, and time seemed to slow down. World sounds disappeared. Wind sounds vanished. What remained was only sound of his own breath. And in that silence, Gajah Mada felt fear. Human fear. Gentle fear. Fear. That made him want to retreat. But he also felt something else. Something warm, calm, and slowly expanding in his chest. Courage. Not loud courage that jumps and shouts, but gentle courage that silently strengthened legs that almost retreated. He moved forward, lifting the wooden stick he carried as a training tool, not a weapon. And when that rioter approached, Gajah Mada held that attack, not with strength, but with stability. The spear bounced off. No blood. No big wound. Only sound of wood meeting wood. And two young men, equally trembling by their fears. The other rioters saw that and stopped. No courage to continue. No real reason to fight. They lowered weapons. The old trainer gave a signal to his troops not to pursue. "We did not come to punish," he said quietly. "We came to calm." And everything ended as quickly as it began. The wind returned, touching the river surface. Small birds were heard again. The world moved again with its gentle rhythm. When they walked home, Gajah Mada walked a bit behind. He touched the ground with his fingertips and felt its vibration. He felt that day changed something inside him. When the old trainer approached him, he said gently, "The first battle is always about oneself, not about the enemy." Gajah Mada looked down. "Master, I was scared." The trainer smiled thinly. "Everyone is scared. What distinguishes is who listens to his fear, and who lets it guide the way." He added more quietly, "You listened to it, and you kept standing." Gajah Mada took a long breath, feeling his chest warmer, calmer, fuller. That day, without him realizing, the seed of a great leader grew inside him. A seed that later would become a great tree in the history of Nusantara. But that night, when he returned to his barracks, he only stared at the dark sky and whispered, "Thank you for the small courage that came just in time." And Majapahit, in its silence, seemed to answer, "Your journey has just begun." Time walked like small river water, continuously flowing without sound. His first battle was not a great victory, nor a story of heroism. That would be written by historians. But for Gajah Mada, that day was a door opening, a new part inside him. And Majapahit, which always knew when someone changed, began to notice him in a subtle way. A few weeks after that incident, Gajah Mada was called to a small hall on the east side of the palace. The hall was not big, not grand, but very calm. Dark red wooden pillars towered silently. Cold stone floors reflected afternoon light softly, and in the corner of the room, sound of water dripping, falling from an old pitcher into a clay bowl. The old trainer brought him inside. "Mada," he said quietly, "starting today, you will learn different things." Gajah Mada bowed respectfully. "What must I learn, master?" The trainer smiled thinly. "No longer about the body, but about the heart." He was introduced to a kingdom elder, an aged man, whose face was calm, like the surface of a lake. In the morning, the elder sat, with back straight, both hands touching knees, relaxed. He opened eyes slowly and stared at Gajah Mada like someone reading an ancient book whose pages were made of light. "Young man," he said gently, "what makes you stand here today?" Gajah Mada thought for a moment, then answered, "Because I want to be more useful." The elder nodded. "And being useful sometimes is not about strength, but about clarity." He signaled to Gajah Mada to sit in front of him. "I will teach you about inner steps." The following days were full of practices that did not look great in the eyes of lay people. Gajah Mada was taught to sit still for hours, listening to nature sounds and his own heart's voice. He was taught to notice thoughts coming and going without holding them. He was taught to view fear not as an enemy, but as a small shadow that can be passed with one breath. And most importantly, he was taught to recognize calmness. Calmness that is never loud, never shouting, never forcing, but always strengthening, like roots of a big tree that are unseen, yet hold the ground very firmly. Every afternoon, after that inner training, Gajah Mada walked out of the hall and past the inner palace garden. There, afternoon wind moved leaves with a rhythm almost like soft whispers. He sat under a sapodilla tree, staring at orange light falling on palace walls. And in that silence, he began to understand something. That a great kingdom needed not just soldiers, but strong hearts and clear minds. He remembered his trainer's words. A leader does not walk in front. A leader walks most calmly. One afternoon, the kingdom elder called him again. Gajah Mada, he said slowly. You possess inner steps. Rarely owned by soldiers. Inner steps? Asked Gajah Mada. The elder gazed out the window. Towards the fading sky. Steps that are not hurried. Steps that listen. Steps that guard. He turned back to Gajah Mada. One day, this kingdom may ask you to stand in a place where many other young men cannot endure. Gajah Mada nodded slowly, though he did not yet truly understand the meaning of those words. But in his chest, he felt something starting to grow. A small firmness. Like a small light. Inside a dark room. Waiting to become a big fire. That night, Gajah Mada stood outside his barracks. And stared at the night sky. Stars. Piled up there. Shining softly. Without competing with each other. He took a long breath. Letting night air enter inside him. Like a clear stream of water. And for the first time, he asked himself, am I destined for more than this? That question floated in the air, unanswered by anyone. But the night wind touched his shoulder, gently, as if the world said, we will see. Slowly. That day was the day when the young soldier named Gajah Mada began his first step toward something far greater than bodily strength. He began climbing the inner ladder that would later take him to the highest peak in Majapahit history. But for tonight, he was still a young man, sitting alone under the Java sky that was calm, and the world continued its breath. Slowly. One morning, Majapahit breathed differently. The air felt heavier, fuller, more laden with something invisible. The guards walked with steps more careful along the stone corridors. Gajah Mada, who had now become a young man with a sturdy body and calm eyes, heard the sound of the old trainer's steps approaching behind him. Mada. The voice was quiet, as usual. Today is not for training. You will guard the palace. Gajah Mada's heart moved like a small wave. Not overflowing, but expanding. He bowed respectfully. Order received, Master. The trainer nodded. It is not a heavy task. It only needs calmness. He was placed at one of the inner guard posts, in front of a small room that held documents and important royal symbols. He stood tall, legs stable, breath gentle. There was nothing he needed to do, nothing he needed to say. Only stand, guard, and protect. Time walked slowly. Sunlight moved from one side to the other, marking long hours passed in silence. In the midst of that calm, the kingdom elder approached slowly. He stood before Gajah Mada, staring at him long, before saying, your task today is not guarding the door, but guarding your heart. Because one day, you will guard something much greater. Years passed. Gajah Mada grew. Not just in body, but in silence. He learned that a kingdom is often shaken, not by war, but by words. One day, he was sent to stand inside a meeting room where officials were arguing. Voices were high. Tension cut the air. But Gajah Mada stood in the corner, still, unmoving, breathing in a rhythm so deep and slow that it seemed to pull the room into his calmness. Slowly, without them realizing, the officials lowered their voices. The anger subsided. The storm was calmed by the presence of one silent man. The elder saw this and knew. That night, under the light of a single oil lamp, the elder gave him a dark red headband. This is for you. From tonight, you are by Ankara. No gong. No cheers. Only a whisper that weighed like a mountain. Guard Majapahit. Not with strength, but with heart. And then came the day when the sky of Majapahit turned gray. The queen, the gentle mother of the kingdom, passed away. Her death was not just a tragedy. It was a crack in the foundation of the world. Without her, balance faltered. The king fell silent. The officials grew restless. Shadows began to creep from the edges of the islands. Gajah Mada stood by the king's side. During the funeral, he did not speak. He did not cry. He simply became a pillar. When everything else shook, the king looked at him, and for the first time said, "Thank you." By Ankara, time moved on, like water finding a new path. Majapahit needed a new anchor, a new center. One afternoon, in the deepest meeting hall, the king called for him. "Mada," the king said, his voice tired but firm. "Majapahit is in a heavy time. We need a foothold. We need someone who can keep the world whole." The king stood up. "And now, I want to appoint you as Mahapadiamankabumi of Majapahit." The words bounced softly off the old wooden walls. This is not a rank, not an honor. This is a burden. Gajah Mada bowed slowly. "I understand, my king. I will carry it." That night, he sat under the sapadilla tree again. The title of Mahapadi rested on his shoulders. But he felt it was not a crown, but a promise. A promise that would lead him to the greatest moment of his life. To the oath that was waiting to be spoken. The great hall was silent. The sound of lanterns was the only thing heard. The elder looked at Gajah Mada. "Mahapadi," he said gently, "what is your view?" Gajah Mada stepped forward. Slowly, calmly, like someone counting every breath. He stood before the king, then looked at the whole hall. His eyes were not soldier eyes, not politician eyes, but eyes of someone who had seen the depth and emptiness of the world. He took a long breath and released it. with a gentle rhythm. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but its vibration penetrated the hall like a gong struck from afar. My king, Majapahit is great, but voices from the islands are starting to drift away. If we do not unite steps, we will become a kingdom, standing alone in the middle of a vast ocean. He paused for a moment, letting his words land softly. And to unite, we need something bigger than war, bigger than treasure, bigger than trade relations. The king asked, then, what do we need, Mada? The Mahapati bowed slightly, touching hand to chest. Unity of heart. The hall was silent. The king asked again, and how do we achieve it? In that moment, like the whole world stopped its breath, Gajah Mada looked at the king and all of Majapahit with the deepest silence he possessed. Then, with a voice more like a prayer than an announcement, he said, my king, if permitted, I will utter an oath. The kingdom elder closed eyes slowly, as if understanding that time had finally come. Gajah Mada stepped forward. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. And he stood in the middle of the hall. He felt the stone floor under his feet, cold and sturdy, like the earth ready to witness a great oath. He bowed his head slightly, regulated breath, letting his heart become as vast as the night sky. And in that silence, with a gentle voice that still carried the weight of the world, he uttered the oath that would be remembered centuries later. I, Gajah Mada, inhale slowly, will not enjoy palapa. He looked far beyond that room. Before Nusantara is united, that voice was not loud, not dashing, not theatrical. Precisely because of its gentleness, it pierced deeper into the hearts of all who heard. Some officials fell silent. Some closed eyes. Some shed tears. They did not realize. The king stared at the young man long, then nodded. The kingdom elder said, an oath, born from calmness, will become a strength that cannot be broken. That night, when the assembly dispersed, Gajah Mada stood alone in the inner palace courtyard. The night wind touched his face gently, as if wanting to ensure he was okay. After uttering an oath so great, he stared at the sky, stars gathering, as if listening, and he whispered to himself, palapa is not about glory. Palapa is a promise to guard the world, and I will keep it. With calm steps, the night wind crept between tree leaves, embracing his words in subtle whispers. And Majapahit, in all its silence, responded like the earth nodding. Your oath will become our breath. Night then closed the page of that story, with gentleness, leaving a man named Gajah Mada standing at the highest point in his life, with a calm heart and the weight of the world he shouldered without complaint. Good night.